The Trinity Knot Code. The Trinity Knot is the human trinity played out on earth by the mind trinity, attempting to recreate what God already perfected. And the rule of blame, its split perception of soul, the side effect, limited possibilities it could offer to soul. One should never forget, while I'm referring to human trinity, it is only in reference to human behavior. It is said that history repeats, and while it is a truism, it is not true. Repeat implies everything repeats exactly. Yet the Trinity Knot does show repetition. This is learned behavior. Rules placed in mind by soul in dealing with a hostile environment. One thing that is true, while I speak of Trinity, we all perceive one, and this is both truth and illusion. That often frustrates us. We start with the illusion of two in creativity. We must return the missing element to remove the illusion, turning what was 3 into 5. That is my conception of learned behavior initiated by the first rule. The journey God intended you to have, fate is adults' failure in meeting their own test. Consequences would teach, but adults use it to punish. In trauma of adults' arrogant ignorance, we doom the young to repeat the lessons we rejected. One thing that has unsettled me, once I convinced myself the Trinity Knot existed, I need to offer some answers. Identifying the problem is the beginning. It's useless if it doesn't offer answers. This led to the reality fragments already existed. We talked to them often, yet few could explain how to apply them, at least not to me. I considered possibility during times of arrogance, threat to society from the arrogant control, might be reason for this. An attempt to destroy knowledge, much the same way conquerors often destroy other cultures and reinterpret history. And I still think this is likely the case. Yet, that doesn't remove often what is above is below. The atom represents the mind's trinity imposed on the mortal world. In reality, I think our rejection of the first rule has turned what was intended by God into something that damages us. Natural disasters have no purpose. Arrogant people damage many, and once the lie is exposed, people will lash out. Leaders in the past claimed divinity. The result, when natural disasters hit, they had to have an excuse. Mobs do not treat leaders very well once they've been exposed. Cause and effect led to good and bad. Natural disaster and arrogance of a few created good and evil. Society can do much, but if it's only reacting to fear in a peer group, it will react in groupthink. The soul, so restricted by mind's ability to offer more than 2 possible outcomes, can only recreate the past, with you being the predator. Thus, we are taught God is a punishing God, making him the first predator. Children having the most creativity will always improve on your actions, taking it to the next level. The adult, so blinded by learned behavior, will act out of arrogant ignorance. And children, having eyes as well as ears, the mind will take in all you say. But will the soul look for those answers, or did your actions send it to ask the mind different questions? Learned behavior imposed by events and others, and coping behavior imposed by family and individuals. If only 2 possibilities, it is because we've assigned rule that turns all into negative and positive. What I'm going to talk about, to illustrate my point, a mind is not creative. It is limiting possibilities to a positive and negative. Then soul is blinded to possibilities. It has blinders on. Rose-colored glasses, maybe you could call it. If you live in the past, you will recreate it, and this is the reason the trinities keep occurring. And with this, the mind must create illusion on the mortal world. It is true that the atom represents the human trinity with one variation. God gave soul knowledge of death. It's my contention this knowledge was to teach cause and effect. In fear, we rejected cause, split effect. The human trinity was once three. It now is perceived to be four, with soul split, creativity, and free will. Mind trinity is four, with society and earth representing soul and body. Blind souls act as the mind and the leader representing the soul, that during times of arrogance will be blinded by learned behavior rules, even more severe than the blinded souls. The fifth element in the material world is perception, how we perceive in others' actions, bad and good. The first rule is both master and slave of mind and body, having both behaving as if there is a war, and the soul perceiving the actions of others as evil. Because you remove the assumption, they have a soul. All that is left is the mind. Evil is not evil. Soul is not disappeared, but to damage others, we must believe they have no soul. That is what many have taught, and it is the dehumanization of others that takes place on both sides. The fifth represents ending and a new beginning of souls. On earth, it represents the fifth generation that encompasses 3 decades. It is also the first generation that will start the next cycle, an illusion that will continue until we remove the first rule from society. I suggest good and bad might have been intended by God, and family was meant to limit the need for a child to introduce coping behaviors before it was ready. Natural disaster caused warping of good and bad to good and evil. Good and bad can be removed by individuals. Good and evil can only be removed generationally from society. That requires maintaining humility over many generations. I doubt 5 would be enough, but I believe we can remove the good and evil rule, eventually, back to good and bad, leaving it back where we started. One soul having a journey that is fated by the last generation to remove learned behavior until it reaches the balanced soul level. The end of the journey, end of life on earth, because we are all capable of hurting others. I don't believe a balanced soul can be contained on the mortal plane. We are meant to learn a lesson. We are in effect in a preschool. The human trinity mirrors a marriage. It also mirrors the family dynamic and the concept of the internal working of smallest form of matter, the atom. On the mortal plane, the soul has 2 mortal aspects. One serves, one guides. Both serve as a restraint on individual trinities that would both make the soul surrender to fear and overcome fear. Maintaining that balance is the key, and I suggest it's humility that's the key. The pain you suffer and the knowledge of cause and effect that will make the mind overcome the fear of body and mind to do what needs to be done. Not for itself, because of the empathy it has for others, its unwillingness to see the pain inflicted on them. Many would gladly accept consequences for their actions, but cower at the thought of inflicting pain on others that they love through their actions. If you would damage a spouse, family member, society, then you likely are doing the same with the mind and body in your own trinity. That suggests the learned behavior has so debilitated a person from understanding how they affect others. Remove those rules and see pain in others, you will be forced to see sometimes doing something would be worse than doing nothing. We put that rule in place because we wanted an excuse. It wasn't something that was needed. We just wanted it, and it had to be done. If it would violate the needs of others, then you must restrain yourself. The soul is never conquered from without, but it will surrender to the mind and body's combined trauma and fear of what others do. Only soul at peace can see all the possibilities. Seek knowledge of mind to back it up and understand when to act or not. Arrogant people will use fear to get you to react. This is how it's been. as far as I can remember. God can't exist within himself, so mind, human behavior rules, has souls. Playing at being God, it also can't exist within itself, but it's an illusion. So the perception must be warped to make sense of it. Thus, the human trinity is represented by the mind trinity with two that resemble bookends. This is represented by my spectrum of human behavior. Predator, professional victim, blind soul, strong soul, balanced soul. God was attempting to teach cause and effect, and this lesson is the structure to hold the mind trinity in place. The atom is the smallest form of matter. Family is the smallest form of mind's trinity. One must be beginning and end. One must be an illusion. With all things, there is a trinity, one always silent. It represents truth. In the beginning, it was God's soul and lesson, with lesson being truth. The lesson was cause and effect. Learn it, you gain humility, representing truth. Those five is a basis of my spectrum of human behavior. A predator, professional victim, broken soul, strong soul, and balanced soul. This spectrum also represents journey of a soul. Learn behavior rules placed in mind. First rule was blame. Society imposes rules requiring some surrender of free will. Family imposes rules and coping behavior to society's rules, creating chaos in children. Individuals must impose coping behavior to society and family. It is imperative this not be done before children are ready. A family was meant to unify language and perception. Conflict with society's needs makes that difficult. A warping perception, good and bad, to good and evil. Imposed rules are easier to discard. However, the coping behavior you placed is often from chaos, trauma. Therefore, the first rule is never removed. It's both imposed on you and placed by you. It was awareness of our own mortality that made us reject cause and effect. Natural disaster created society and warped good and bad to good and evil, with soul owning good always. Evil, it's placed on other souls. First rules effect on human trinity, language and perception. Unintended consequences. Predator represents cause. A balanced soul, humility. Professional victim, rejection of lesson. A broken soul, start of journey. A strong soul, the beginning of truth. Recognition, soul exists. Splitting effect created illusion of good and bad, positive and negative, good and evil. Restricting mind to provide two possibilities. We have been taught punishment, truth, its repercussions of rejecting cause, meant splitting perception of soul into creativity and free will. We will not acknowledge what we did. Soul must not exist. This is a basis for the series of books I'll call the Trinity Knot. Individually, rule can be removed. Removing rule from society is generational. Only in maintaining humility can we hope to do that. First rule leads to two extremes. Humility is high with the generation that comes after those extremes, while humility is lowest when peace and prosperity is ascendant. It's ignorance of cause and effect that led to this recurring pattern. Most souls will see a full circle of this twice, representing a great year, which is basically one lifetime. It seems to reoccur around every 3 decades. The extremes represent struggle between mind's trinity and soul's trinity. This coincidentally represents 5 generations, with first passing being only generation making mistake for altruistic reasons. 3 will blame the last, and the 5th will also represent the first in the new cycle. Society out of balance represents the last of 2 cycles, while religion will represent the first. Mind will always react, and so will society, while soul is selfish, has creativity, and conditionally embraces free will. So does religion. Individual Trinity. First rule on children leaves us at predator soul and professional victim. This will be an illusion. Predator soul is the negative assigned to those who hurt you, whom will claim role of professional victim, because we are all victims of the first rule. While balanced soul is end of journey, that will represent graduation from preschool on the human trinity. It can't be contained on earth. Any that claim this is lost in illusion. No one hurts you from malice or hate. It is always indifference. Seeking revenge or punishment will do harm to you. If you could hurt them, they never would have damaged you in the first place. Just a few days ago, my mind conceived an idea that should have blown me away. Yet, I no longer am surprised by this. What's been concerning me all along is how to explain this and finding the structures in society already existed. And then it made me think about Voyager, the spacecraft that has the records to communicate with aliens. During times of chaos, we do tend to have a brain drain. And then I thought, this is much the same argument about mythology and ancient alien theory, which led me to the pyramids. It was my interest in what-ifs that sparked my curiosity, and while both are fascinating, they are not necessary to explain what is being transmitted. The key has been setting in the desert. Man might have created it. What that reason is, I don't know. I don't care. Yet we have a spark of divinity, and that is the creative aspect, so even the flaws can have meanings that were never meant to be interpreted by other people in the way that I will be interpreting this. It could be both accident as well as design. It's the Great Pyramid, is what I'm going to talk about. Looking directly centered to it, you see 3 points, representing the human trinity. While you might assign the soul to the top, I would not. We are talking about human perception, and I insist we are in preschool, meant to learn one lesson. The top point is always seen from ground or air. Thus, it represents the body. The bottom 2 are the foundations of all we perceive, the mind and soul. Mind starts out as ally to adults in shaping the soul, and changes to the spouse after the rebellion phase of puberty wars. We are told in the story of Adam and Eve that God, while announcing punishment, mentioned that man would seek woman attempting to return and be unable to do it. It would be futile. God assigned us a level of access. We violated this trust, and we must earn it back, much along the lines of the spectrum that I came up with to assign ways of protecting our needs. Therefore, in my spectrum of protecting the 3 basic needs of safety of body, a security of mind, knowing that there are predictable outcomes, and to keep insanity from infecting the soul. This is acquaintance, friend, best friend, intimate relationships, with family being the only group you must manage. They can't be placed at acquaintance unless they so violate your own needs that you've no choice, while others need less access. Others want less access. So, the family is the first group that you must learn how to place along those 4 levels. And I suggest very few families want to know as much as what an intimate relationship would require you to reveal. Others will want even less access than you're willing to give them. It's this that represents the reality that there are actually 5 points to the largest pyramid. 4 are at the base, with the top being the 5th. It both represents you as well as the spouse, that is the foundation. But the top also represents the body and perception of the outside world. Thus, it represents both the human trinity and the mind trinity at the same time. It doesn't end there. I only talk to the points of the pyramid. However, there are walls to unite the points, just as the body keeps the mind and soul safe and hidden. When I started all of this, it was from the perspective of the effect the closet had on LGBTQ community. It caused behavior that was at odds with the people I was around. This led me to grasp the learned behavior model, and I mentioned that leaving the closet didn't dismantle the walls. The door was from fear of rejection. The walls are coping behavior rules. But what are they trying to cope with? Well, we do not have sexuality at birth. What we have at birth is creativity. It is that and the behavior pattern of others around us that makes us doubt ourselves. It's fear of rejection of our creativity. That is what the soul is there for. That makes us shut down, grow awkward. Walls as boundaries, and 4 walls coming to a point in the Great Pyramid represents the 4 of the 5 senses that I believe form language of perception, with the point at the top of the pyramid representing the body and the ultimate expression of perception. We have 5 senses that are acknowledged: sight, touch, taste, smell, from the nucleus of language of perception. While hearing is one of the senses, I maintain the only time the soul uses this is when engaged in its purpose of creativity. It needs to find a way to focus, so it uses it for that, or it uses it to hear itself when it communicates with others. You are trying to expose your idea to others so that they can challenge whether or not you're thinking correctly. The 5th sense would have never made me consider the pyramid at all. However, what triggered my interest in the Trinity notebooks and the book I am writing was the knowledge we had 7 senses, and 2 of them were using aspects of the other 4 to conceive of the soul in relationship to outside forces. This is vestibular and proprioception, uniting all 4 of our perceptions in relation to the body and outside forces. These 2 represents the language of the body, and the soul must learn. How well it learns this will depend on how many learned behavior rules it can adjust or remove over time. If a learned behavior rule is triggered, the creativity you once enjoyed will turn from a river flowing to a trickle, until the rule has accomplished its purpose or been challenged by soul. So we have language of perception that encompasses the soul's communication. Language of body is feelings. It can't demand attention like the mind, and often with learned behavior rules, a body's ability to communicate with soul is limited. It was the learned behavior rules that handle mundane actions such as maintaining the body's functions, while the soul is busy with creativity. That was the reason it was deemed necessary for us to be able to do this. The soul has a purpose, and God is the God of souls. It must learn the lesson of cause and effect, even with the handicap of the first rule. Pyramid has 4 walls, but recently it was discovered each wall had 2. That makes the walls 8. If the walls represent learned behavior and soul uses 4 in its unique language or perception, it uses creativity to learn those 2 languages to communicate with the body, and then we have 2 of the 4 sides explained. Then there is the mind, and I mentioned hearing is secondary. If used at all in creativity, the mind is a recorder, and only when the soul seeks answers will it access the mind. Depending on how debilitated it is by learned behavior, the mind will respond. Hearing is primarily used by the mind. Engaging in communication, the soul must focus on creativity of language. It can't hear and speak, so the mind fills that role. It's why you must remember people will not change their thoughts until they have time for the soul to seek what you gave to the mind. Before that, learned behavior assigns values on the words, and the highest priority will be on the needs for the soul engaging in the creative nature of communication. This is the basic function of language of perception. So, we have 7 of the 8. But look, what's missing? Something the soul would not need to know. It must learn. Of the 4 senses used in language of perception, when united toward the body, it learns 2 aspects of its language. Learning behavior and language of perception is the 2 soul needs for communication with the mind. The mind handles the repetitive needs of the body. Thus, both body and mind must have 4 elements to their language. The key is likely with the mind's communication with the body that is not required for soul to learn. It affects the soul because mind must direct the soul of the body's needs. It's these 8 parts that few have reason to develop. Yet, I suspect, when discovered, it will require a unification of the 4 elements of language of perception. So, outwardly, the pyramid does well with my work, and understand I am only focused on how to communicate this ideal. Let someone else focus on finding answers we don't need. Who and why it was started does not matter. We have one last thing I want to focus on. The top of the pyramid represents the perception we have looking at each other. We see the body, no matter looking down or straight ahead. It is the body you see. The soul and mind are within, hidden. The Great Pyramid has the king and queen's chamber, and I've recently realized that the mind acts much like a spouse, but it starts out as ally to the parents. The top of the pyramid represents the body. In my example, the king's chamber represents mind, and the queen's chamber is represented by the soul. Remember, in ancient Egypt, the heart was considered the house of the soul. The mind was removed upon embalming. We might assign value to soul as the top, or assign value to the highest chamber as soul. We are in preschool. Like it or not, that's where we are. Free will untamed will become arrogant. We must learn cause and effect, because any attempt to remove chaos will cause society and humanity to deteriorate. Like it or not, the goal must be to keep entropy from infecting your Trinity. We learn 2 lessons from learned behavior. Control yourself, you can manipulate others. This is represented by mind and society and professional victims on my spectrum. Control others and take all you can, represented by soul. Religion and predator on my spectrum. We are talking about perception, and soul having creativity and free will is selfish. Mind can only recreate what the soul or God has already created. Learned behavior rules reacts to the soul's creativity, and then it directs its soul on what's going to be created by the amount of information it gives you. That is why you see chaotic behavior in others, such as PTSD and borderline personality, which I suffer from, both of them. The PTSD represents a trauma event, a learned behavior imposed on us, while borderline personality represents coping behavior placed in mind by us. Reality is the first rule of blame, created positive and negative. And the soul will always perceive itself as the positive. Therefore, soul perceives creativity as good, free will as conditionally bad, only if it violates your ability to create. Control yourself, you can manipulate others. Control others and take all you can is a warping of the truth. I think what we should have learned was control yourself. You will not need to control others. It would keep the threat of entropy and sanity from infecting your human trinity while allowing the soul to engage in creativity. Notice this is an offshoot of the society's twist on good and evil. We are individuals, yet seek to blame others, infecting us with insanity that we assume what you do to yourself, others will do to you, making you seek the manipulation where there are none, and using the argument, it's better to hurt them first, since they would do the same to you. God was teaching cause and effect, and we rejected it, and in doing this, he is labeled the predator. Parents teach, and children label them the predator. They are doing their best, but we are all damaged by the one rule. A predator is only perceived by us. They likely see themselves as the victim. The victim, of course, would hardly care. They don't need to know the intent, they just need to know the outcome. Only God knows the intent behind the actions, and this is why we are constantly told not to judge others. Society punishes, God teaches through consequences. They are rewards for your behavior regardless of you perceiving them as punishment. But society often punishes to attempt you not following the path God set you on. That would obviously be punishment. Soul rejected cause, split effect, negative and positive. That is the first time humanity created. And I can go further with the perception as a pyramid being representative of what we're dealing with. We know both the king and queen's chamber have shafts, 2 each. It's already pointed out that Orion's belt is significant. That is also 3. The human trinity would be represented there. Each side of the pyramid has 3 points, 2 outward meeting at a point inward. We use the language of perception, creating 2 perceptions to understand the other 2 in human trinity. One could say the point that unifies represents the mind and body's attempt to perceive creatively each other. The mind rules the past, the soul conceives the future, and where those meet is the present. The body represents the present. The top of the pyramid represents body, while the base represents the soul and mind. The 2 points meeting is the 2 ways of communicating with the other, but the body, the least thing we seem to value, is represented at the top. While we are conditioned to assume we are at the pinnacle of existence, we haven't left preschool. I say that teaches humility. Learning cause and effect started this. We are born and we die. Rejecting this, we created 2 that are 1, and 1 that is truth. Return cause to the equation, then mind and soul will become truly 1. I don't believe the first rule is imposed by God. It was coping behavior. I believe this. It has to be. The effect has made the soul hidden. God appeared to be a punishing God. Why would God do that? Look at the most arrogant in society. They do well on earth, but they lose the creative spark. They are no longer able to adapt as well. The more arrogant they become, they are more susceptible to those that do have access to their creativity. That's why once they get to the top, they soon get rid of the most creative people around them. They would prefer to have the broken souls. It's possible God revealed cause and effect, and the material world is the journey we all must take in order to reconcile this. I believe this is a twofold test. Chaos must be controlled. We need possibilities, and those only come from chaos. The rule of blame seeks to eradicate chaos. That would not serve God's purpose, unless you believe in a punishing God, and I do not. How many disposable souls do you think God gave you to destroy in this fantasy of good and evil? Every single soul is an aspect of God. In dividing effect, we divided perception of soul. Yet soul is the unification of creativity and free will. It is soul, whether you call it creativity or free will. Pretending they're separate is where we get into the problem. It's an illusion, with the soul being the truth. It always will be. In the beginning there was God, soul, lesson, and lesson will always be truth.